Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup for Wednesday, October 1st, 2025. And thank you for bearing with me as I had a last couple of weeks off with a trip to India, which I'll be sharing some of that news from that trip as we go through our certainly our first couple of stories today, but certainly bleeding into the third story as well. We've had a very busy last couple of weeks, and certainly the world does not stop when you take a recruitment trip abroad. And there's a lot to catch up on, and thank you for bearing with me as I took a week off from doing the newsletter where our questions come from each week. And for those that are new to the Roundup, we do our Roundups here on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time typically. And then we also have a newsletter that comes out on Mondays, Monday morning, typically around 8:30 if you subscribe via LinkedIn, and 9 a.m. if you subscribe via our website. I'm dropping the link to our website in the chat. That's smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and you can get a copy of the email newsletter via that site in your inbox every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll also drop this week's edition of the newsletter in the chat, the email version, as well as the LinkedIn version. With the LinkedIn version on that same website page, you can subscribe as well via that page as well. So that just scroll down and look for the subscribe via LinkedIn. So that newsletter has a variety of topics covered in it each week, from social media stories, which can be anything from upcoming webinars, how AI is being used, how social media is being used in international education, new digital reports that are released, all of these kind of things that online covers in a very broad scope now. And we also have what we call, after the social media news, we have a section on U.S. Central, kind of what's happening in the U.S., a U.S. big picture news, if you will, and that has content that will cover what the latest new executive orders are, what kind of new policy decisions have been released by the current administration, to what court cases are going on, kind of big picture questions, advocacy efforts that are happening, so that colleagues like yourselves that are heavily engaged in international education can be following up with your elected representatives, certainly on-campus folks, advocating up the chain, managing up to senior leadership on campus to keep them informed on all, and I do mean all, the current changes that seem to be coming at us very hot and heavy over the last few months that we all know, to keep them abreast of all the changes that are impacting what we do in international education. And certainly the newsletter does that. There's also a Solutions Central section to the newsletter that really gives you an idea of what's happening, what some people are doing creatively to respond to the challenges we face in international education. So there's really a lot to dig your teeth into. We also, importantly, as part of our newsletter each week, we do a global roundup as well. And that global roundup is meant to provide some perspective, some oftentimes very important perspective on what we're going through here in the United States. We know it's been very crazy and changing from week to week, month to month, as court cases are decided, as new orders come out and new proposed rules happen, and causes all sorts of opportunities for discussion and concern on our campuses. And it's our job to keep an eye on what's going on, but also keep in mind what's happening in other parts of the world, because it is a global world we live in, certainly in international student mobility. There has been the Big Four, which included the US, UK, Canada, and Australia in the past. It now seems to have expanded to the Big 14 or so, with a number of other countries in the Gulf, in Southeast Asia, and mainland Europe that have become, Northeast Asia, that have become major destinations for international students beyond just the Big Four. So we talk about how they're doing it, what policies that they're putting in place that are certainly not happening here in the U.S., how aligning economic policy and needs and skilled labor shortages and international education needs in terms of facilitating a pathway for immigrants coming in or students coming in to take the classes that help in professions that will help meet those labor shortages that are coming down the pike in those countries. So there's some great content that we share weekly through that roundup, global roundup, so you know what's happening in other parts of the world. So to keep us all on the same page with what we can be doing to help better inform our colleagues on campus and certainly our elected officials that have impact on government policy. So before we get into this, I want to take two opportunities to thank people who I've had the opportunity to chat with lately. First up, while I was on my trip to India, we were in the process, those of you who are in Ohio might know this, of starting a Study Ohio consortium finally, and getting a critical mass of people together. We've been connecting through webinars the last few months and getting our core team together, and that's essential for any state consortium to be successful, is to have that core group of volunteers that can really drive the organization forward and have those that take care of marketing and recruitment, those that take care of membership, those that do finance. And as we were talking last week, I was in India on a trip, a recruitment trip. I just met with colleagues at the embassy in Delhi to provide some content, to ask some questions about some of the challenges we've had as institutions this summer with the visa pause, with the new social media vetting, with the unavailability of appointments, the increase in visa denials, asking the kind of questions that we all have had, and getting the opportunity to hear from the folks that are in charge of the public diplomacy efforts in India was sobering, to be honest with you. Had that opportunity to hear from many of them, and I shared that I would be shared why I would be talking about that conversation here today on October 1st, when I had the chance to get back in to the home office to share my thoughts and digest those thoughts, because what I heard at that meeting at the U.S. Embassy with the U.S. Embassy staff in New Delhi was troubling. I've had many conversations with consular officers, vice consuls, public diplomacy officers at embassies and consulates around the world in my 32 plus years of work in this profession, international education. And there's only one other time that I was really shocked by what I heard, which oddly enough was in New Delhi about 9 years ago. Working at another institution, had an opportunity to travel to Delhi and then in India and then to Nepal to meet with consular officers and key partners, that type of thing, on a Commerce Department trip. And we were at a cocktail reception at the Deputy Chief of Missions house in New Delhi. And for the first time, I had a really open and honest conversation with a significant person. The vice consul at the time had just come into her post and was just taking on control of visa policy for how it would be implemented in the country back in 2016, November 2016. This is shortly after the election, before Trump took office, the first administration. And I was told, I was working at an institution at the time that relied heavily on Indian students and Nepali students for our international enrollment. I'd just taken on the job after previous director had been there 30 years. And what I was told at that reception, keep in mind that a number of our Indian students that were coming for grad programs, mostly in business, coming from the Andhra Pradesh, Telangana region in southeastern India. Many of them needed some English support before they began their full degree program. So many, probably of that, we had 100 or so Indian students applying for visas for that spring term, and probably from India, and about 90 of those were needing English as part of their program. So it was right after conditional admissions had kind of been done away with. You needed to have a bridge program or just do an English only I-20, even though they have been conditionally admitted to an academic program. Had this conversation with the Deputy Chief of Mission, and she basically said, if any Indian student needs English, they're not a serious student. So that was the new vice consul for visa policy for India at that time, 2016, coming in and saying, hey, if you're an Indian student who needs English support before you start your degree program, you're not getting a visa. That crashed our Indian numbers in the spring that year, from about a 65 to 70% visa approval rate to less than 10%. So that was 9 years ago. Fast forward to end of September 2025, having a conversation at the American Corner in New Delhi, talking to the public diplomacy officer and having a conversation with her where she basically said, things have changed. We now have this new social media vetting policy. We're struggling with how to implement it locally, and the staff time it's requiring is affecting the number of appointments we can do. Therefore, we're not doing, as we have done in the past, a visa season in the summer months from May through to August, because they just don't have bandwidth to do increased appointments. At least that's what we were told. They also shared that no longer are international students a priority for visa appointments. In fact, that B2 visitor and business visa appointment requests have a priority for new slots that are opening up at consulates and the embassy in India. That floored me. That hurt my heart. That hurt my reason for being in this profession, that for so long it has become an overly politicized event or topic this past year, that now international students are no longer a priority when it comes to securing visa appointments in the #1 sending market to the United States. Does that hurt anyone else? That is as depressing a news as I've ever heard. That was the message coming out. That's one of the primary messages coming out, that international students are not going to have extra appointments either in the summer months or in the lead up to the spring intake in January, so more December appointments. So as a result, her advice to me and to U.S. colleges in general was that we need to be issuing I-20s a full year in advance so that students can then apply for those appointments, and maybe they'll have a chance of getting in for that fall intake or maybe the spring intake, depending on when they're intending to start. So what that does, well, yeah, sure, I'll wave my magic wand on campus and we'll get our processes moved 6 months earlier, because that's basically what's being requested of us. For undergraduate, we can probably get away with that fairly easily. We have a very simple process for undergraduate admissions. But in India, where it's 75–80% graduate market, the process is very different for graduate applicants in the United States in general, because departments tend to take a long time and delay the process. Many choose to wait until February, March to make decisions, because they want to wait until they know how many returning students on financial assistance or assistantship will be coming back, how many spaces they'll have available based on grants that have been received by the faculty to fund different positions for research assistants, teaching assistants, all of that. So when you hear that, right now we have a challenge in trying to separate graduate departments, to separate their admissions decision from their financial decision, which would hopefully move them more towards a rolling admissions process separated from a financial process, which can't happen until February, March anyway. If that can happen, then we might have a chance of getting there. But what that also does, it affects your CRM in terms of when you're opening up applications for, if this public diplomacy officer is to be believed, that we have to make the decisions and get I-20s in the students' hands as early as possible, that meaning a year before they might need to enroll. That means getting their I-20s as early as the end of August or early September for the following entry, for year's entry in August the following next year. So we're already behind based on what I just heard in India. That if we're not putting in our students' hands I-20s, assuming that are admitted and they've shown funding and meet our requirements to get our I-20, they won't be able, they're already behind if they want to have a chance of getting into next fall, based on what this embassy official told me in Delhi. Now, it's not universal, this isn't happening across the globe, but this is the #1 sending market to the United States, and that's what a lot of my content is going to be focused on today. So those conversations were very difficult, because it's requiring a significant shift in how we process applications, when we process applications, and how quickly we can get documents to students to allow them to apply for visas. And will they still want to come? That's always the next challenge. And the news certainly has never been less positive than over the last 8 or 9 months in terms of policy decisions that make the U.S. a more welcoming country. So we've seen what the government has done, what they've done to potentially hedge free speech for international students that are in the United States, or have even those that might be looking to get visas to come to the United States, things they say online and how that can negatively impact them, not only with pro-Hamas content that we talked about over the last few months, but now with the death of Charlie Kirk, those that celebrated his death or promoted the violence that surrounded his death. Those students will likely not get visas now, if that happened. There's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts there, but in terms of policy, there's been a lot that's come out, the potential ending of DS and the extra administrative burden that would place on students and cost on students even to finish their academic program, to take advantage of OPT. No student would be able to get their degree and apply for OPT in their undergraduate or PhD level work, maybe in the master's. If they do get a four-year clock, then they can at least apply for OPT and be on it before that clock runs out. But the inability to change your major or add a second program, those things are significant hurdles if that gets approved. So lots has been going on. I don't need to rehash all that. But what we are going to talk about today is probably in terms of timing. Of course, they didn't know that I would be in India for this to happen, but of course they don't do that. They don't make decisions based on me. Who does that? Nobody. But in terms of the single biggest bombshell that could have gone off, happened beginning of last week in India, when the U.S. government under the Trump administration announced changes to the H-1B program. First up was the $100,000 application fee that would now be required of all new applicants for H-1B visas. Now keep in mind, the H-1B cycle, they don't award, the current system is a lottery-based system that starts on April 1st. Everybody who applies before that date for permission to start work as an H-1B starts April 1st. So new applicants, not those that are already on H's, but new applicants, the companies who are sponsoring the student or the potential worker for an H-1B would have to pay $100,000. And the government uses the justification that the money raised from these fees for these H-1B applications would then go into training, academic training for students, U.S. students, in the fields that we're really short on, that we've been short on for over 20 years in this country. That this is not a new phenomenon. There's been so many things that have been tried locally, and that's what this government really tries to do, is push the driving force of education onto the states, into the localities, to make those decisions to help bring up the kinds of students that we need in our universities. Since those policies that's always been the case, frankly, and even under Democratic administrations that favor a more centralized Department of Education, which, as you know, has been fundamentally dismantled by this administration. The decisions have typically been made on STEM programs and that type of thing, girls who code kind of camps and all those kind of STEM programs that are developed for the youth of America to really embrace STEM and then carry on with that through high school and into university life. That hasn't worked and hasn't generated the volume of U.S. student interest in these STEM programs, that now the government is trying to say, well, we're going to collect all this money from the tech companies that want to bring in these STEM employees, and we're going to use that money to fund better training for U.S. citizens and permanent residents to get the training they need and become more interested in the kind of jobs that right now are going to primarily international folks, either direct from overseas through a number of games that the tech industry plays with applicants for H-1Bs direct from India, or from students who've been on international students who've been on OPT and are looking to move into an H-1B pipeline. So, long story short, I'm in India the last 2 weeks. This news drops on Monday or Tuesday last week, and basically says that, hey, the $100,000 for every new for new applicants for H-1Bs starting in April, and then also potential dismantling of the lottery system. That is the current methodology of selecting the 82,000 H-1B recipients every year. Keep in mind, the current system also has an exemption for higher ed institutions that do not have to, are not a part of that 82,000 cap. They have the ability to hire researchers, professors, other staff on H-1Bs in an unlimited way. So now, the part of the challenge is these H-1Bs will now, that universities, the way the regulations, change in regulations is drafted, universities would also have to pay to hire a professor, to hire a researcher, any other staff member on an H. They will now need to pay, instead of $1,000 or so, which is the rough application fee now, up to $3,000 for expedited cases, they will now have to pay $100,000. And even the schools with the big endowments aren't going to be willing to pay that kind of money for one person. So that's what's happening on the US side. In India, those who follow this know that H-1Bs in the United States right now, 70% of H-1Bs are Indian. Another 12% are from China. By far, this is part of the Indian dream of coming to the United States. And again, the numbers, I don't know the numbers of current H-1Bs that are direct from India and those that have come through the student pipeline, through OPT, and then are part of the H-1B. I assume it's roughly even, but tech companies have learned how to game that system. Because it's a lottery system, what they've done is they have applied for the same person in 4 or 5 different locations in the United States. So they have 5 chances to get that person in the US on an H. And then once they're in, they can always change where that person goes. So that's the current system. And that would be done away with, where these companies now, instead of being able to do that process, which is allows them to pay $1,000 for every application that they file for the same person, the new system would not have that lottery option where they could apply for multiple places. And if they did, it would be $100,000 per application as opposed to one. So that dream for Indians who look to come to the United States for work, and we all know in our communities, I'm in a small town of only 40,000 people, and our one movie theater has at least 2 Indian movies playing every week. A small town of 40,000. The Indian diaspora in the United States is enormous. And it's another fun fact, we know the 70% that are of the H-1Bs are Indian, but in terms of the largest group, nationality group, applying or receiving U.S. citizenship every year, so going through H-1B, next step is green card, then citizenship. That process can take 6 to 8 years or longer. The number one group of new citizens, U.S. citizens every year after Mexicans, is Indian. So how significant is the Indian dream? It has been based on H-1B as that pathway. After student studies, legally able to switch to a dual intent category like H-1B that can lead to more permanent residency and eventually citizenship. Is this change to H-1B the end of that Indian dream? We were urging all to just take a beat last week, because within the first hours after the announcement was made, there had to be a clarification that this wasn't for current H's. It was intended only for new H's, which again doesn't start till April. And then the next questions on the lottery system. What does that do? We've seen since then the tech industry rally up, and they filed injunctions and submitted papers for court cases to prevent this from happening. So, like everything else that the Trump administration does, it's going to get challenged in court. So, for these tech companies that were huge supporters of Trump getting him elected, they've now I don't know if they're ready to turn on him, but they're certainly not happy with this development, because it puts their future hires in jeopardy because of the extra cost, because of the end of the lottery system, totally throws into upheaval all sorts of plans. So will it end the dream? Not if cooler heads prevail. Now, the press in India, anyone who's traveled there knows this. Anyone who's been on LinkedIn and hears from colleagues in India, they tell you this all the time. The Indian press, any small niche change in work policy or visa policy impact from the United States or any other country gets super magnified and oftentimes sensationalized, particularly when it's negative, sensationalized for the Indian audience, because it always has been the dream. Go to America, you can study there, you can work there, you can eventually settle there. It's been the dream, and that potentially could be taken away if this gets implemented as is. Now, the important thing is we told them nothing's final. Everything's a negotiation with this administration, so there will be some back and forth. It will get challenged in court. It may not even be allowed, but certainly regulatory change in the H-1B program is needed and has been on the cards for a number of years. Whether this is part of that eventual motivation, like he does with his trade deals, he goes very extreme and then he brings it back. Well, people only remember the extreme part of the initial offer or initial position. So my advice to our agent partners that we're meeting with that are advising students is, even if they have a student who's in their final year of undergraduate study or third year of undergraduate study, he's got 1 or 2 more years to finish this year and another. He goes to the U.S. if he's in a STEM program, a 2-year master's program. He's got 3 years of STEM OPT after that, so it's 1 to 2 years before he leaves. 3 years, 2 years of study, 3 years of OPT. It's potentially 6 to 7 years from April next year, when any potential changes might happen, before that student will need to worry about H-1B. That could be 2 presidents different from where we are right now. So is it worth getting rid of their dreams and not following through with applications, or deciding, why am I even bothering? I'm going to New Zealand. That's a problem. Students shouldn't overreact, particularly if the thing that will potentially impact them wouldn't happen for 7 years, 6 or 7 years. 1 to 2 presidents later could have very different policies. So part of what my advice was, breathe. Take a step back and say, hey, do we know exactly what's going to happen? No, because again, everything is a negotiation. There will be some give and take, and likely they'll be talked down from this $100,000 figure. There may be a modest increase, though, but the lottery system might be the place that does need changing, and that's to a more merit-based system, and that would be fantastic. But part of the goal, I think, is the administration is to make the qualifications to get an H more stringent, to make the minimum salary requirements higher, so that be in that $110,000 plus range, which would rule out the opportunity for H's for students coming directly after a bachelor's degree, working for 1 to 3 years on an OPT and then applying. It's unlikely that most undergraduate students, unless they're living on the coast where they might be in that top range anyway for cost of living adjustments for salaries, would need. If you're in San Francisco, LA, Boston, you're going to need a 6-figure salary anyway to live there. But it's a lot of uncertainty. But is it going to end the dream? I doubt it, because that dream is so strong, so embedded in the culture, that if you're looking at the U.S. for study and potential work, there's a phrase I learned last week in India, jugaad, amongst Indians, that is they're creatively finding the ways to make their dream happen. That's the general gist of that phrase, jugaad. So I use that quite a bit. But that's, I think, will always be what drives Indians ahead, is they'll find ways to make it work. So, second question of the day, and that is, how important is ROI for international students? Now, ROI, for those not familiar, return on investment, has been increasingly a part of how I have talked about my institution in terms of the kind of value prospective students, parents certainly are placing on, hey, what am I going to get, or what is my son or daughter going to get for the $160,000 they're going to spend on an undergraduate degree experience over 4 years, or the $75,000 that we might spend for $75,000 we might spend for a master's degree over 2 years? What are they going to get for that? What are the starting salaries? Are they guaranteed jobs? Are they getting internships? All of these things. That's the ROI piece is driving a lot of decisions. Part of that is pandemic related, I'm sure, because during the pandemic, families lost economic buying power and maybe haven't recovered. There's been just general concern amongst parents that, oh, we want our kids to stay closer to home now, so maybe all the way in America or Canada, Australia, UK isn't the best thing. We need to look closer to home, maybe in the Gulf if we're in South Asia, or in Southeast Asia for study, maybe Japan or Korea that are, and in Taiwan, that are putting in policies to help make study easier for international students. So the ROI piece really has become a central point of why prospective students, international students, are looking at other options. Not just maybe 20 years ago they would look at 5 schools in the United States, or they look in 3 or 4 schools in Canada, or 2 or 3 schools in the UK, but where it was usually the focus was singularly on a country. Now students might be applying to 4 or 5 different countries, and maybe one or two institutions in each country to keep their options open. Maybe it's no longer a safety school that students are applying to, it's a safety country that they're wanting to go keep their options open when it comes to work, what's return on investment. But of course, what we focus on in the US when it comes to value isn't always the most quantitatively documentable part of why students choose an institution. We talk about all the time in the US at our institutions, we talk about the qualitative experiences, the skills that are learned outside of the classroom, on campus, where it's a living learning laboratory on our college campuses that are purpose-built campuses for student engagement, student life, living, learning, playing, advocating, engagement. All of that happens on our college campuses. We have purpose-built housing for students. Most other countries don't do that to the extent where they can do more than a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 on their college campuses for purpose-built housing. We do that on our college campuses. That's why we don't have the housing shortages that Canada had, that UK had, that Australia had during the pandemic especially. So we're better positioned to survive this. We're better positioned to deliver on a qualitative experience of value in addition to the ROI of jobs and salary requirements that folks will have, certainly students will have. So when you start defining what ROI is, and we talk about this, what outcomes are, we all have that career services stat that's roughly the same at every college campus, that 80 to 90% of our graduates get jobs within 6 months of graduation. That's a general number that applies to all students on a college on your campus, typically not specifically international students. So this is generally a very significant, not smokescreen, but it's not always the most appropriate use of data, certainly appropriate data for the audience that we're trying to target in international education. Because most institutions don't have international students specific outcome data in terms of our international students. How many of them are applying successfully for OPT and getting positions every year? We can find that information. We don't actively seek it out typically, but it's there. Institutions can mine that data from SEVIS, because we're supposed to keep records of where our students are working when they are on OPT. That is accessible. Do we go after it at most institutions? No. But should we? Absolutely. So that kind of data can be earned, can be learned, can be earned, can be packaged appropriately to show ROI. Does it always happen? No. But should it happen? Absolutely, and particularly in this day and age. So one thing we focus on at the University of Akron, we have two stats and facts that we back up, and we're developing the anecdotal stories to support our claims that, hey, our students do experiential learning before they graduate, and that's one of the main reasons they are able to secure that first job out of college. Whether it's at the undergrad level or after master's degree. We talk about starting salaries in each of those fields, and we talk about placement rates for our co-op students at 100%. All of that matters because that demonstrates value. And we talk about our master's degree programs in our College of Business. 4 out of the 5 are STEM. All 5 can be done in 1 calendar year. Fall, spring, summer. I can do 12 credits, 6 credits, get a 30-credit master's degree in a STEM field. And starting salaries in those are anywhere from $70,000 up to $110,000. So at a cost, and for one calendar year for a master's in business, a cost of only $50,000. So that is doubling your money, and depending on which, up to doubling your money in 1 year of work to pay off your initial cost for your master's degree, and then have a $50,000 profit in 1 year of work. So that's value for money. That is ROI. That is outcomes driven. Having that data that you can share with future students and their parents is absolutely essential. Rankings have dropped in importance for prospective students and parents over the last. It's still there. It'll always be there in some way, shape, or form. But the real question, if you can answer effectively and preemptively have that information available, puts you head and shoulders above the competition when you can document that ROI. So I'm going to finish quickly on a story that is what will make international partnerships work. And this is something that I found very important. Part of my role in the last two institutions I've attended, have worked at, has been around partnerships as well as student recruitment and developing policies and identifying partners that are good fits for our institution, that make a lot of sense on a number of different levels. And IIE has played an increasingly important role over the last decade or so. They've had this program called International Academic Partnership Program, IAPP. I went on one of those. They do a different country every year. They've done a couple follow-up visits to countries that were high demand, that they're doing second trips to, like Thailand. That's the one I did a couple of years ago. Now they're doing a follow-up one. They do a different one every year. But these bring groups of 19, 20 different U.S. institutions into a country for a week, meeting a variety of different colleges and universities in those countries, forming academic partnerships as part of that process. That's not the only way partnerships are developed. They're often developed in terms of relationships faculty have with colleagues on a partner university campus, or shared experience in terms of, I've got a program at the undergrad level, but we don't have it at the grad level. Can we work together on doing a pathway for our students to your program, doing joint degrees, doing dual degrees, joint research, all of that. What makes it work? Consistency of representation on both sides. That I'm, as a director of international engagement and responsibility for new partnerships and forming those and facilitating that on campus, I work with departments to really help make that happen with the MOUs, with the cooperation agreements that are developed. But I need someone like that on the other side to be able to facilitate that as well. And nothing makes those partnerships tick better than the face-to-face connections, the relationships that develop between parties on both sides to really strengthen those bonds. IIE's put out a brand new survey called the International Partnership Survey. They're doing it globally over a 5-year period, covering different parts of the globe, but a really important next step for our institutions in terms of getting a sense of where we are compared to our competition, where we are lacking compared to other parts of the world. I've always been struck on how a lot of institutions abroad are having, including in their strategic plans, international elements, particularly international elements tied to UN's SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and that where they bake those into their goals as a university. So that really reflects, I think, a different take and different approach to international education than we have in the United States. I'm dropping in some links into the chat of some of the things I've seen in the last few weeks. We've seen the University of Arizona shutter 4 of their micro campuses in China, where these transnational opportunities are shutting down because of politicization of the U.S. relationships with institutions in China, the potential threats for espionage and stealing of technology, all of that. That's nothing new, but they're shutting down as a result of a House committee that submitted a report on the 13 campuses that were at threat. One of theirs was on that list, and so they've shut down all of them, affecting 2,200 students that were taking classes at those micro campuses. We've seen a lot of shifting in recent months on that. So it's TNE China is opening up the door, not just to the U.S., but to hundreds of new programs they've approved. They've made it a little bit easier for institutions that want to partner with Chinese institutions to get approval. It used to be a very laborious process, but has become a much simpler, much more streamlined process. And that's a good thing for those institutions that can invest in those kind of relationships. So, but those really the legal ability to have those relationships is kind of a key. But the development of the personal relationships with those folks on the other campus that share the vision. And that's in the end, in everything we do in international education, it's driven by the relationships we're able to develop in the key markets with the key partners, with the key universities that we want to build long-term success with. So that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. Apologies for going a few minutes over, but a lot to say, and really appreciate you all bearing with me since we haven't had one of these for 3 weeks. So look forward to chatting with you all in the weeks and months to come. And until next week,